The first truth I want to tell you is this: pain has a way of shaping a person long before they learn how to fight back. I didn't grow up in a home filled with safety or softness. I grew up in a house that shook often because yelling was normal and violence was familiar. Poverty surrounded us, fear raised us, and for a long time, I believed this was what life was supposed to feel like. My mother, my sisters, and I lived with my father during those years. Money was low, food was often stretched, and anger seemed to live in the walls. The worst part was watching my father hurt my mother. When you are young, you don't have words for abuse. You only know the sound of crying behind closed doors, or the way your mother's shoulders tense when footsteps approach. Everything changed the day my mother walked out. I remember her picking up her bag. I remember her looking around the room as if she was memorizing it for the last time. And then she left. No long speech, no dramatic goodbye. She walked out because she feared that one day she would have to defend herself and someone would die. She left so she wouldn't kill him in self-defense. That was the truth I learned only much later. But as a child, all I saw was abandonment. It didn't matter why she left. It mattered that she walked out and didn't take us with her. I stood in the doorway and watched her disappear, and something in me collapsed. I never forgot that moment. It was the day my childhood ended. After she left, silence didn't heal anything. It only made the loneliness louder. The house felt empty but heavy. My father didn't know how to take care of a family, and we didn't know how to take care of ourselves. We learned to survive more than we learned to live. By the time I grew older, depression wrapped itself around me. I didn't understand the word depression then. I only knew I felt heavy, numb, tired, and distant from everyone. Later in college, I learned the grown-up term clinical depression. It sounded professional, almost scientific, but the pain was anything but clean. Depression made me withdraw from everything that required feeling. I looked for anything that could numb me, distract me, or drown out the noise inside my head. Years passed this way. People saw a quiet girl who kept to herself. What they didn't see was a person trying to avoid collapsing. Somewhere during those years, I discovered that being useful to others was the only thing that made me feel worth something. So I worked. I worked hard. I worked endlessly. I said yes to everything and everyone. I became the responsible one, the caretaker, the helper, the fixer. If someone needed anything, I was there before they asked. It made me feel valuable. It made me feel like maybe I deserved to exist. But underneath that kindness was something I refused to acknowledge. I still hated myself. I blamed myself for my mother leaving. I blamed myself for the emptiness that followed. I blamed myself for not being enough. When you carry that kind of weight long enough, the body eventually steps in. The mind can lie, the heart can pretend, but the body doesn't join in the performance. One day, it collapses, and mine did. My health broke in the middle of all that constant giving. My body finally screamed, "Enough!" and the word came wrapped in a diagnosis I never expected. People often imagine cancer as a lightning strike moment, but for me, it was slow devastation. Not just the physical part, but the emotional unraveling. I had built my identity on usefulness, on proving my worth by helping others. But cancer stripped that power away. Suddenly, I was the one who needed help, the one who needed care, the one who had no choice but to stop. And stopping was terrifying. The recovery was long and messy. It forced me into silence, into reflection, into facing things I had hidden under work and service for years. I had no distractions left, and that's when the memories returned. My mother leaving, my father's anger, the poverty, the shame, the depression, the self-blame. Every wound I had learned to ignore showed up for inspection. It was during this period that I confronted the ugliest truth of all. You can spend your whole life helping other people and still hate yourself. And that hatred eats you alive slowly. Not all cancer comes from cells. Some comes from swallowed pain, buried anger, and the refusal to take care of yourself. When I could no longer escape into work, a voice appeared in my mind. It wasn't poetic or dramatic. It was simple and desperate. I need help. It was the first honest sentence I had spoken to myself in years. Asking for help was not something I had seen growing up. In my family, you suffered silently. You didn't complain. You didn't share. You didn't trust. I asked my father, of all people, the same father who had caused so much damage. I expected him to scream or dismiss me, but he didn't. For one of the rare times in my life, he didn't explode. He didn't blame. He didn't lecture. He drove me to a therapist, and that moment became the beginning of something new. I didn't know it then, but I had stepped onto the first part of my path toward freedom. That was when I finally learned an important lesson. Surviving isn't the same thing as living. Surviving is a reaction. Living is a decision. And up until that point, all I had done was survive. Therapy was the doorway I never knew existed. I walked in expecting judgment or pity. Instead, I found someone who spoke to me like I mattered. It was uncomfortable at first. I wasn't used to being seen. I wasn't used to being asked questions about myself. I wasn't used to talking about pain without being punished for it. In those early sessions, everything in me wanted to run. Vulnerability felt foreign. It felt dangerous. For so long, needing help was a sign of weakness in my family. We survived by toughness, not by openness. But the therapist didn't rush me. She didn't force anything. She let me breathe. She let me unravel at my own pace. It took years. Healing didn't show up in a straight line or with elegant speeches. It showed up in fragments. It showed up in questions that punched through old beliefs. It showed up in small victories, like learning to say no, or learning to rest without guilt. It showed up in moments where the old voice said, "You're nothing," and a new voice quietly replied, "That's not true." What I learned during those years was simple but heavy. You can't heal by helping everyone except yourself. You can't build a life if you refuse to build one inside your own body first. I had wasted years trying to prove my value through service, through caretaking, through fixing other people's lives. But none of that filled the emptiness inside me. None of it taught me how to love myself. And that was the deeper fight. Not the fight against poverty, or abuse, or cancer. The real fight was learning how to respect myself. Learning that I deserved to be treated with care. Learning that I was allowed to ask for help. Learning that being a fighter doesn't only mean defending others, it means defending yourself. As I kept going, I noticed that shame began to lose its power. Trauma has a way of stealing your voice when you're young. Therapy gave mine back. I started talking about the things I never said aloud. My mother leaving, the violence, the depression, the quiet hatred I carried toward myself. I learned how many people grow up unable to ask for help because they were taught that pain must remain private. I wasn't alone in that. The strange thing about healing is that when you start to speak, other people start to speak too. Pain recognizes pain, but healing recognizes healing as well. I found that sharing my story didn't make me weak. It made me free, and it helped free others too. There's a kind of strength that only appears when you're honest about what hurt you. At some point, the therapist looked at me and said, "You've invested in your mental health more than most people do in their entire lives." I didn't know it, but I had. Healing wasn't an accident. It was a decision, and it was a difficult one. It required me to look at my beliefs and challenge every lie I had inherited. Lies like, "You're not enough," "You don't deserve love," "You're too difficult," "No one will stay." Trauma teaches those lies early. Healing untangles them slowly. As I grew stronger, I discovered something important. Life is not just about hardship. The world also has beauty, softness, and light, but you have to choose to keep turning toward it. You have to choose to look for it. You have to choose to believe in the possibility of joy, even after years of despair. It wasn't magic. It was practice. It was choosing to notice small good things. A warm cup of coffee, a quiet afternoon, a call from a friend, a moment of laughter. Treating those moments as proof that life isn't just suffering made a difference. They became stepping stones back to myself. For the first time, I no longer lived for survival. I lived for meaning. I lived for peace. I lived for a version of myself that wasn't built from wounds, but from dignity. And then something powerful happened. I realized I could be a role model, not the kind that announces wisdom, but the kind who simply exists differently, the kind who treats themselves with care, the kind who shows others that it's possible to climb out of darkness without pretending the darkness never existed. There are still challenges. There are still days when doubt whispers that I'm not enough. There are still moments when fear tries to reclaim space. But now I know better. Now I know I have the choice to step back into the light. And I keep stepping, every time. The world is full of suffering. The world is also full of beauty. Both exist, both shape us, but we get to choose what we return to. I ended up becoming the fighter I always needed. Not the fighter who swings at enemies, but the fighter who protects their own heart. The fighter who refuses to abandon themselves. The fighter who believes in their own worth, even when doubt hisses in the background. And if there's one thing I learned that a 31-year-old should understand, it's this. Self-respect is a choice. Healing is a choice. Stepping into the light is a choice. No one can make that choice for you.